pleasure for me to be here in Boston to represent our research that was done co-authored by Professor Matero, myself, and Reza Vatankha. I will be talking about cleaning terracotta on recent trends in technical research and practice. Following on preliminary research begun over 12 years ago on the effects of various cleaning methods on unglazed terracotta, together with the published methodology on evaluating the consequences of past cleaning and implication for future policy and resources on stone masonry published by the Historic Scotland in 2003, we are now in the first phase of a renewed research program to evaluate past and current knowledge on cleaning methods and their effect on architectural terracotta. Our first phase of research has focused on updating our earlier literature review on the conservation of architectural terracotta from 2001 till today, as well as together with a survey of professionals involved in the restoration of terracotta buildings, including architects, artists, conservators, contractors, and product manufacturers. The question that we are trying to answer today is, do we know enough? How much do we know? This is why we decided to cite the quote of Simple Simon in the lower corner. So here today we would like to share the status of our research on cleaning architectural terracotta. And I would also like to emphasize that this research was not founded and not supported by any company. Starting to look at different cleaning methods and how they have evolved over time, we start from the earliest techniques of steam, sandblasting, and soap washes with the cleaning of the Woolworth building in 1916, only 3 years after its completion, and then was recleaned again in the 1930s using a golden dust, a dish soap together with sun grate. Arriving to the introduction of the commercial restoration cleaning products, beginning in the 1960s, both in Europe and in the US. As we see when Prosoco in 1962 introduced its first chemical commercial cleaner product for old masonry, including for brick and terracotta. By the end of the 80s, more sophisticated mechanical techniques as microabrasives such as Jaws, Rotec, and Spongex were introduced, together with the first experimentation of laser, firstly used in the UK in the mid-90s. So we see a broad range of technique use, from the oldest to the more modern. And our main question is, how are they used? Are they properly used on terracotta or no? So far, the published literature suggests that there has been very little qualitative evaluation of the short or long-term effects of cleaning. Today, a success is mainly pronounced by the look and the degree of soiling removed. For the purpose of our literature review, terracotta was defined based on the most common definitions used historically to describe the material. A structural or semi-structural molded clay product made of mixed clays. It's generally hand-pressed into an absorbent mold. The formation of the fire skin is indeed related to the concentration of colloidal clay particles in the upper surface due to the suction of the plaster mold during drying. During firing, then, this zone densifies during sintering, and which becomes an important protective surface for the weathering of terracotta. We updated the bibliography till today for a total of 567 publications between books, proceedings, articles, and standard. Only 15%, which is represented by 85 publications between the total, are focusing on cleaning and soiling. The cleaning database was then organized in 6 major categories. Starting from the highest percentage, we have 32% represented by case studies, which exclusively refer to publication on the conservation of specific buildings and sites. We then move to cleaning methods, represented by 27%, which exclusively refers to publication which include detailed explanation of cleaning methods. we account to 59%, and then we move on to hybrid, which represent 25% and refers to publication that addresses 2 or more of the above subjects. And then we move to the lower percentage of the publication, with soiling, with 7%, which exclusively refers to publication that attempt to characterize soiling on terracotta. Then we have standard with 6%, which are publications devoted to the development of test standard for cleaning terracotta. And then we end with 3% represented by evaluation, exclusively publication devoted on the evaluation of cleaning methods, both lab and field. If we start looking at the different the cleaning publications over time, we immediately notice in the graph a quick rise and spike from 1960s and 1980s. It's mainly due to a series of events that we will see in the following slides, but mainly it's important to mention the general popularity in technical building preservation, especially in the United States, together with the introduction of commercial chemical cleaners, as we saw with Prosoco R1 in 1962. If we move to looking at the cleaning methods over time, we see how chemical, followed by mechanical, have remained the most popular according to the Lit Review and also according to our survey. By the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s, with the introduction of more sophisticated and controlled techniques, we see when laser starts to pick up with the first experimentation. In the graph, it's also interesting to notice that steam, which is one of the oldest techniques, shows an oscillation of popularity, mainly in response to problems encountered with the misuse and legal restriction related to mechanical and chemical cleaning. Still remaining to look at the cleaning methods, as we mentioned, chemical has been the most popular, also comparing to the different data. And between chemicals, we have acid, which leads for 44%, then alkaline for 24%, which is often used in combination with acid as a pre-wash alkaline and then a neutralized acidic afterwash. And then finally, we reach to detergents, which represent 32%. In our bibliography, 27 of between the 85 publications were represented by case studies. Between the case studies, we look at pre and post test, and we saw how a few examples show before and after cleaning test. It's also important, as we're looking at this graph, to mention that most case studies that are published today are very iconic and important buildings, which are generally done by large offices or large corporations, which mainly has to conduct on pre and post test. What we should really learn by looking at this graph, and it's really indeed very regrettable to see how, since cleaning is not a one-time treatment, and knowledge of the condition of the surface after and pre, such as roughness, microstructure, permeability, pH, residual chemicals, could help establish a damage index to guide the effects of subsequent soiling and cleaning operation. Other interesting data that we pulled and were provided by Prosoco regional reps were pretty interesting to look at. In the first graph, in the first map, you see how there is a national difference in the use of products within the United States. The Northeast, which present heavier soiling, shows more HF-based product cleaners, such as light-duty and heavy-duty restoration cleaner. Moving toward the West and Midwest, where they have less soot deposition, they favor more low acidic products, and also they have more restricted environmental law. And then finally we reach the South, which shows a higher use of biocidal treatments, mainly to reduce climate. If we start looking at the graph below, it's what Prosoco has been collecting data since 1997, and they show how it's important to compare, while acidic cleaners the use is in decline, we see a rise between the products of pre-wash alkaline and then acidic after wash. And finally, we reach to our timeline. I will go more in detail, it's just to show you an overall. We created a timeline in an effort to coordinate these all different types of data that we collected, and also to try to better understand and connect different events with each other to understand how the trends have changed over time. It's important that this timeline, it's not only read horizontally, but also vertically. It's organized in 6 major indicators. As if we start from the upper part, we have seminal publications, very important publications that have changed on cleaning terracotta over time. Moving to the line, the orange line below, we have standards, which include American Standard, English, European, and also NPS brief. Then we move to safety regulation, which include EPA and OSHA regulation. And then we move to products, which refer to the different introduction of products and methods over time. Below the timeline, we have major case studies, and then we end with conference and workshop related to architectural terracotta and more in detail cleaning architectural terracotta. If we start to see from the beginning, we see how earliest techniques were used, and we saw with the Warworth building in 1916 and in 1932. It's also important to mention the first publication of McIntyre, where he tried to characterize soiling and talks about durability of terracotta in the UK in 1929. As we described in the 1960s, represent the introduction of the first chemical cleaners with Prosoco and then with other products, we see how the use of also chemicals started to increase starting from the 1970s. 2 important case studies needs to be mentioned are 2 English case studies that happened, 2 major buildings were cleaned between the 70s and the 80s. It's the Royal Albert Hall and the Natural History Museum. Both of these 2 examples represent 2 large scales of perceived damage caused by misuse of wrongly cleaning technique. The Royal Albert Hall was cleaned with a wet abrasive system, and the Natural History Museum was cleaned by HF-based cleaner. As the consequence of the increase of use of chemicals, starting from the 1970s, we see how NPS starts to publish first briefs between 1975 and 1979 on cleaning masonry, and in particular one by D.T.O. Patterson on preservation of historic terracotta. And then we see also OSHA started to introduce the first regulation for the handling of chemicals, and we have the EPA, the Clear Water Act. And then in the beginning of the 1980s, we have the first English standard on cleaning masonry, which included an appendix on brick and terracotta. If we move to the next phase, the 90s really, and in particular the 1994, represented the first sign of concern in the use or misuse of acidic cleaner, in particular for terracotta. And it's important to mention 2 papers, the Mohinan in 1995 and also the Matero and others, together with the publication of Ashurst on the 2 volumes on cleaning historical buildings. In the 1994, in the same summer, we also have 2 major conferences on terracotta in Europe. The first one, the Syntax Symposium in Florence, Italy in June, and then in September, the English Heritage Conference in the UK. The Reliance building that was cleaned in between 1994 and 1995 in Chicago also represent a new beginning in the use of a low acidic product. This building was cleaned by using an alkaline pre-wash followed by neutralizing acidic after-wash. Another important is the OSHA that first introduced the first chemical training for people handling chemicals. Also, in the 1997, here, it's the first ASTM cleaning standard for cleaning masonry. 1997 was the first one. It's important to mention also that by the end of the 90s in the United States, major metro area such as Chicago and other major cities started to ban the use of HF, especially after the first case of visible damage and also as a consequence of damage due to drift in the application of acid. So we arrive in 2000 where Prosoco, to remain in the business, to remain competitive, introduces first product based on ammonium bifluoride, EnviroClean. Ammonium bifluoride is a salt that dissolved in water becomes HF. So apparently has a lower concentration, but because water, it's also depends also on environmental conditions such as temperature, it's really not easy to predict the final concentration of the product itself. And then if we move, we also have another important paper, which is one of the only one, as Fiedler mentioned before, that tries to attempt on the characterization of soiling, Matthew Hall in 2003. If we move to the last years, closer to today, what it's important to mention is the revision of the ASTM standard in 2013. Also, the British standard was revised. And also, Ashurst, it's about to revise its publication on cleaning historic building. And while in the United States, there is still not a certificate to use laser, the European standards are working on developing a standard on the use of laser for cultural heritage building. And here we are, and we are getting to the end of this presentation, and we are trying to kind of draw a few conclusions. What this whole study means, and how do we know? As suggested by the LEET review, what we are or not are doing, it's almost not existent. Success, as I mentioned, it's mainly defined by the final look and result in the field. This is what supports the various cleaning methods. Best methods for assessment are far from standardized for comparison, as we saw how little is the percentage of evaluation and assessment compared to the cleaning methods. Soiling, it's a complex substrate, how Matthew Hall tried to explain. And how specific cleaning methods affect that, it's far from being clear. Mainly, especially referring to case study, what it's published, it's a very iconic buildings, which they kind of obscure the reality. But looking into the future and thinking what could be the next step, we should try to develop methodologies to study the cumulative results of past and future experiences cleaning terracotta. But regardless of that result, we should be also shifting our thinking from remedial to preventive conservation. And a good example comes directly from Penn, where at the Nanotechnology Center, they are developing a super hydrophobic surface, a coat extremely thin and transparent, reversible, possibly to be removed by using a solvent, UV resistant. This coat will be tested in the second phase of our research, which will be focusing on the effects of chemical cleaning on terracotta. Starting from an earlier study of our 1995 research, which showed increased porosity and potential increased permeability to terracotta as a result of 7% HF commercial cleaner, what remains to be proven is if this will lead to accelerated weathering, which is the next phase of our research and my thesis. Thank you very much.